Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Let's Talk About It. This is Susan Johnson, and I'm here with my co-host, Dennis O'Brien, and boy, do we have a fabulous show for you today. I am so excited because today we have people from the Connecticut Human Rights and Opportunities Commission, and right now we have attorney Cheryl A. Sharp and also Anna Mitchell, who is the outreach coordinator for bilingual education. And this is going to be a great show. And we're going to have lots and lots of information for everybody to listen to about what we should do when we find that there is an issue of discrimination. And we are going to talk about what they do and what their experiences are. Right, Dennis?
Yes, Susan, I'm really excited about this because it involves the law. And I've been in the law for over 50 years now and still doing it. And very pleased to meet Cheryl, fantastic, and Mrs. Mitchell, of course, and Mr. Mitchell is off camera like I am. He's here. I'm not on camera now, but I'm here. Right, Susan?
You are
Okay.
here. That's right. And that's why everybody can hear you.
Yep.
And so this is wonderful. And so Attorney Cheryl Sharp is appointed as the Deputy Director of the State of Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. And that was done in July 4th, 2014. And you were second in command of the oldest governmental civil rights agency in the nation. So tell us a little bit about that and how did that happen and what was your experience just before that occurred?
I am so humbled and pleased to be here with you. I love watching you work at our state legislature.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I appreciate all of the work that you do for our great state. The commission, like you said, is the oldest governmental civil rights agency in the nation. And what I was doing right before I became the deputy executive director is that I was in the legal department, working on prosecuting cases in state court, in federal court, at the state Supreme Court. And so the law, as you were passionate about the law, so am I. You've been at it for 50 years and I've been at it for 30 years. And so civil rights law enforcement is so important. Discrimination is so harmful and really tests the ends of our humanity. When an individual is discriminated against, treated differently because of some immutable trait that they have, some part of who they are as a human being, it's devastating, it's hurtful, and our agency was created to deal with those issues. In addition to the civil rights law enforcement, we do affirmative action plans. We enforce and review for state agencies. We also do contract compliance, the enforcement of the contract compliance laws. And as you know, I'm sure the state of Connecticut spends hundreds of millions of dollars every year on contracting and public works contracts. And so we oversee the set-aside program for the state. We also do training and development and education and outreach. Ergo, our outreach coordinator, who is bilingual, Anna Maria Mitchell. So we crisscross the state trying to educate the public about their right to be treated fairly with equality and sometimes with equity, right? So equality is treating people the same, like everyone wants to be treated the same. But sometimes people need something a little different. If you're in a wheelchair, if you have no cutout to get onto the sidewalk, then you can't participate equally with everyone else. That's equity, giving people what they need so that they can have this equal participation. So I know I've said a mouthful, but our agency does a lot.
This is great. I think you've said a lot, and I think that, I just want to go back to the ADA that was put into effect in the early 90s. And, when you mentioned the sidewalk, I have to mention that because I think that so many people had limitations before they had access to being able to move around out with a wheelchair, and making sure that under the ADA they had access to some type of equity so that they would be able to be treated in a work environment or wherever, that they'd have access and to be able to perform those duties with just modifications in the working system or in access outside in the sidewalk or onto the bus.
One of my most riveting cases in my entire career was a disability case.
Yes.
And it was an individual. He was a paraplegic. He had been in an accident because at some point he wasn't a paraplegic. And all he was the top performer in this company in Connecticut. Top performer. All he needed was 4 bricks to be placed under a table so that he could work, so it would be high enough so he could fit his wheelchair under it. The company wouldn't put the 4 bricks under the table for him to do his job. The other thing that he needed was a accessible bathroom, that the door needs to be moved over a foot, 1 foot, which may have cost $1,200. The company wouldn't move the door over. So every day, this young man would have to, he'd have to take apart his wheelchair to fit under the table, first of all, so that he could work, to be the top performer. Then he had to put the wheelchair back together so that he could then get into an elevator and go home to use the bathroom, because he could not use the bathroom at work.
Wow.
Again, when I think about humanity, how are we treating one another? How are we showing up in this world and treating one another? Because this young man, who was so full of life and was an excellent hard worker, was treated differently because of a mutable trait, something he couldn't help, right? The state of being a paraplegic. And it was such a minor thing that needed to happen. But humanity left through the back door.
Right, and they call that a reasonable accommodation to address some, disability. That's what the term of art is, and that is something that we're very, very focused on, to try and make sure people have that access to a reasonable accommodation. And that is one of the great things that the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights does, and that is something that is fabulous. I just want to move over a little bit to Anna Maria Mitchell, and as the outreach coordinator for bilingual education. And as I'm sure you're aware, Wyndham has the highest percentage of students that have a home language that isn't English, and it's one of the things that we want to make sure that everybody has, good access to the right kind of training. We do have one of the only dual language schools in the state. So we are really focused on these things, and we've expanded access to dual language schooling, because it's my understanding from the work that I've done on this issue that we need to make sure dual language opportunities are there in school systems where students have a home language that isn't English. And so tell us a little bit about that. And I have to say also, I'm very proud that we did pass the civil rights accommodating law for students that need some type of bilingual education this last session.
No, and actually, thank you. It's a pleasure being here today. And what I have to say, coming from a Hispanic home and then being bussed out, I was one of those students who was bussed out to Farmington High School, and having to transition from an Hispanic home where my mother only allowed us to speak Spanish, and then being driven to where you weren't accepted and the chocolate bus was coming. It's dear to my heart to push this issue, to make sure that, like Cheryl was saying, equally, us sitting at the same table, right? Because we're all human.
Right.
And we all want to be heard. And if you can't understand my language, then please provide something. I, at the age of 8, had to translate for my mother, who was diagnosed for Parkinson. That is nothing. That is something that a child should not have to do. That should be mandated by an adult. So here at CHRO, it is my pleasure to go into these communities, speak about the programs, speak about what we do, and make sure that everyone understands that we are here. And right now, our pamphlets are actually brochures, are actually now in Spanish and in English. The website is in Spanish and English. And us, like anybody else, we're tweaking, but we're making the movements to make it better. And as you saw in our equity study, it's a big issue in there. And I think that everybody should be able to have access to these programs. But if we're not speaking their language, then we're in trouble.
I'd say that's correct. I mean, one of the things that I was very, when I first got elected to this position as state rep here in Wyndham, is I heard complaints from the State Department of Education saying, why do you have so many students that are in special education? So I went to some of the members of the Board of Education, and they said, well, that's because we have so many students that have a home language that isn't English. And I said, well, gee, that doesn't sound like how the law should be operating and how special education should be working. And there is a lot of different, analysis that goes with that. But that's why I created the first task force that we had in my first term. The speaker let me do it, creating a task force on bilingual education, and I learned some things about that. And then the next speaker came along, and he created a task force on bilingual education, and we're still working on how to do that. Now, we've actually been good in terms of when students are successful with English and another language. We have where they get credit now for that in the school system. So that's one thing that we did a couple of years back, and now, of course, we have the rights, the civil rights for students that have a home language that isn't English, and it's something that I think that other European countries seem to be able to manage it pretty well. And I think maybe we should take a look at what they're doing in Europe. I know when Dennis and I were in Germany, we talked to the mayor of Bad Soden, and he was excellent in English. But they started off, teaching their German in the preschool. Then they went to teaching Latin first. And then they went from Latin to teaching English. So I think that was one of the things that I thought, what have we done in this country? We got rid of Latin. Yoo-hoo. That didn't seem to me too smart. But anyway, we digress, and I want to stay focused on civil rights. But so one of the things also that you've been doing is you've worked with the racial profiling group. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
I have. I've been working with the racial profile group maybe for now about 4 years, and what happens is that there's actually a yearly report that comes out. They have actually made a formula, which can detect the town that's actually not being compliant. So with that being said, we go into those towns and try to educate. If you do get stopped, we try to give them a little bit of the formula of what they're following, so you're well aware. And we go town to town and visit these towns that are having a little issue. It seems to be working out great. We actually did one a couple of years ago in Willimantic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I've been familiar working on some of these issues here, and I think that we do a very good job at this point of making sure that we're not doing racial profiling. And I know Dennis is on the first taxing district. You're going to be working with the police here.
Yeah, I came out of retirement this year. I thought I was all done with being involved as a candidate for local office, but now I'm on the taxing district board of directors, which actually, in general, governs the mostly the finances of the police and fire departments. And I remember that event that took place here. We were there. It was a large crowd, and you probably were there too. This guy that does the studies is pretty good. I mean, he's
Chaperone.
Yeah.
Yes,
He was there, and he gave quite a very, very great presentation. It was a little complicated, but not. Not if you just stayed with it and listened. And he's done a lot of good. But with he's created the data that you can base what you do on. I was just wondering, Anna, if when you go to the towns, do you go visit the police departments as well?
I don't visit the police department. I actually do have a conversation, but I do visit the town.
Okay, and you see the people. Okay,
I see
the public,
people, the community. Okay, right? Because I think within society, we sit here, we know the actual problem. We've studied the issue. Sure. But we don't go out with what we've actually found out. We don't share it with the community. Yeah. So if we're not sharing it with the community, we're still standing here. We're looking great, but the community's still suffering.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's important that the community gets to tell its story as opposed to other people telling the story for the community. Yeah. I've been a part of CTRP3 since its inception. I was one of the first members as a part of that board. And what we were trying to accomplish, I think that Ken Barone and Andrew, their group has done such a phenomenal job, and the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities has been involved along the way, because fair and impartial policing to me is a basic right.
Oh,
It's
sure.
a human right.
Yep.
When you give individuals, firearms and then they're in a position of power, you want to make sure that the community that they're serving, the community that they're policing, understands their rights, duties, and responsibilities, and that the police department also understands their rights, duties, and responsibilities, so that you don't have these negative interactions, and instead you have community and police working together. Because I think all too often we forget that the police are a part of our community as well. And so it is that the community members and the police have to come together on a common ground to have an understanding of the fact that there is a need for policing, but that the policing should happen in a fair and impartial manner. And we just held one of the events that Anna was talking about in Glastonbury recently. And it's interesting to see what the perspective is coming from the community and how it sometimes, differs from that of the police. But it's so important that we bear in mind that the community's perception of how they're being treated is just as important as what is actually happening in terms of treatment. If we're going to start breaking down walls and breaking down barriers so that we can have fair and impartial policing that the community believes is fair and impartial.
Yeah, I think your agency, among others, and your agency stands out in that regard, has done an awful lot to make that situation better. Obviously, there's still a big need for improvement. We know about, horrible cases that have happened in situations where police have stopped people and the tragedy ensues, and that is so sad. I mean, it is so sad. And one of the things that you might want to talk to the public about when you go out there is just, when you're stopped, what to do. And that, I think that's vitally important because, you never know. As you say, the person stopping you has a gun. And and you never know. So I really laud you for what you've done and what you're doing. And this is a state in which there's a strong need for that. There's no question. I mean, it's probably a stronger need for it in a lot of other places too. But Connecticut is an unusual state, and it is still to some extent, and something I've complained about for years, in terms of education and otherwise, it is still segregated. Very segregated,
yes.
As to not only as to race, but also as to income, and financial ability, and that to me is bothersome. I grew up in New Britain, and New Britain I've lived in. Okay, there are 7 towns that are, educationally speaking, that are in the lowest ERG, educational reference group, that have the largest achievement gaps. And no, you can just easily you can guess what those 7 towns are, and we're one of them here, and of course Hartford is one, and New Britain, my hometown, is one. So I've lived in almost my entire life in 2 of those towns. So, and one of the great things about growing up in those towns is those towns were New Britain, when I was growing up, was relatively integrated for the times. Okay, not like it is now, but it was relatively integrated, and it was a tremendous benefit for me as a white male to be in an integrated community and not growing up in an all-white town like Old Lyme, for example. I mean, it just made it such a difference in my attitude towards other people, because I got the opportunity to meet the great Kenneth Clark, Kenneth Clark, who was a witness for the plaintiffs in Brown versus Board of Education. He was a witness for plaintiffs in a case that I handled along with the late, great Ray Norco, who was a director of the Legal Aid Society of Hartford at the time, formerly worked out here in Willimantic. We sued the town of Manchester for racial discrimination when it dropped out of the CDBG program, 1979, 1980. You were probably still in school.
I was.
Well, I wasn't. I was still relatively a rookie. But fortunately for us, the Justice Department joined us in the case, and I was able to meet Kenneth Clark and talk to him a lot about integration. And if there was ever a strong advocate for integration, it was Kenneth Clark.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I just I think we have a long way to go in that regard.
Yes, we do. And I think that one of the things that I want to say that I always say when Dennis and I get into this conversation is the fact that the schools that are in the lowest categories were the schools that have been chronically underfunded since Weicker was the governor and stopped, making sure the education cost sharing grant was equalizing the cost of schools all throughout the state of Connecticut through the spending cap, which will be something I'll be working on shortly, but we'll save that for another time. And so we have that situation where we've had underfunded those areas and had people say, but look at all the money. But then you have to say, well, look at all the students because the students need those resources and more so than ever because of the requirements as we get on and understanding and making more requirements for students for education. So with that said, I know that we're running down and we're going to take a break. And
Already?
Yes,
Wow,
already.
time
Boy,
flies.
time flies. But I'm Susan Johnson. I'm here with my co-host Dennis O'Brien, and we are here. We are thrilled to be here with Attorney Cheryl Sharp, the Deputy Director of the State of Connecticut's Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, and Anna Mitchell, the Outreach Coordinator for Bilingual Education throughout the state of Connecticut. We'll be right back after these messages.
Hey, it's Dennis O'Brien. You might think I'm out in the hallway or something, but I am here. I'm off camera, but I'm here, and I'm here with my co-host, the wonderful State Representative Attorney Susan Johnson, and Anna Marie Mitchell, okay, who is the outreach coordinator for
Commission on Human Rights.
Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, and Cheryl Sharp, who is the Deputy Director of the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, a former colleague of the great Charlie Critch, who everybody in this town knows.
Yes, they do.
I'm sure you work together on a lot of cases, and we can talk about that some other time, maybe. But
Yes.
Okay, but in
Hi,
any
Charlie.
Event, yeah. In any event, I'm sure Charlie will be listening. Anyway, we're so glad to have you here. We had a great discussion in the first half of the show, and now Susan, take it away.
All right. Well, here we are. We're, one of the things that is something that we were just talking about as we went off the air is the idea that because the state has limited access to a social safety net, because they don't provide anything really to speak of with regard to housing for people with behavioral health conditions. They've actually closed down mental health facilities and put people with behavioral health disorders in prisons, that we have shifted the duties of all these different programs onto our educators and onto our police. And this is a very unfair thing that the state has done to the police and to our educators. And we were just talking about that. So I just didn't know if you went to pick up a little bit on that and the impact that has in terms of how we deal and talk to our police and how we deal and make sure we have equitable access to educational opportunities for our students.
Sure. Training is necessary. So police, they have a difficult job. And like I said earlier, they are a part of our community. And so we have to make sure that proper training is done. There needs to be training to deal with deaf and hearing impaired individuals when there's police contact. There needs to be training to deal with individuals who are speaking other languages other than English. There needs to be translation sometimes. And it shouldn't be a little child. It shouldn't be the 6 or 7 year old of the parents who are about to get into some trouble. It needs to be that that resources are provided to police departments, are provided to schools, so that translation service is available. It's so critical to have that. We were talking about a program that we have at the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, and it's called Connecticut Kids Court Academy. It's not too late to register. It's a free program. It is a program available to any student who is in 5th through 12th grade. We meet virtually through Teams, and we have some students from your area. We have, I believe, a couple of students from Willimantic. Actually, we've had students from Wyndham. We've had students from Norwich Free Academy. So there is an opportunity for students to meet judges, attorneys, social rights, civil rights advocates, and social justice advocates. And so we encourage students to go to our website, ct.gov/CHRO, and look for Connecticut Kids Court Academy and sign up and register because, like I said, it's free and it's a wonderful opportunity to get exposure to the law.
This session will be coming up February 13th. We will start up. It's every other Tuesday.
online, 1 hour,
Online.
3:45 to 4:45.
Right.
And I also said that the legislature and legislators have a very difficult job because there are so many issues and there is a finite amount of funding to fund these issues, and we have to decide as a community, right, as a state, how do we want to use the limited number of funds? Do we want to use them to incarcerate individuals, or do we want to use them to educate, train, and provide opportunities for individuals? We talked about segregation, and there are many pockets of segregation throughout the state. And then if you opportunity map the state, meaning where are the most opportunities, it does not generally end up on the map in areas where there is a great deal of segregation. So we have to look at our communities and think about how we can empower the individuals in our communities. You earlier talked about the 7 places in the state that there were achievement gaps, or the achievement gaps were the highest. Well, I come from one of those cities as well. I was born and raised in Hartford, as was Anna, and I was born and raised in the North End. It doesn't mean that you don't have potential there. There's a lot. I came out of there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential there. It's how are we going to use our resources to access those students who believe in themselves, or we can breathe some life into those young people so that they believe in themselves and they have some hope and that they want to accomplish. But it takes resources. You can't skimp on the resources. You have to make sure that the resources that are being provided are the resources that are needed, as opposed to just saying, oh, here's some resources. Find out what the community needs. What do those young people need to be successful? So that's at the CHRO, we try to create programs that would address the needs of those young people. And you know how we find out what the young people need? Guess what we do?
You ask them.
We ask them, because that's what's important.
Yeah.
That's
I passed.
excellent.
Ding, 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 you're
I
right.
passed that one.
Yeah, all right.
I
That
passed
is
the audition.
that is really excellent
I got
point.
that
and
one
that,
right,
and
folks.
and that is one of the things that we really work at when we have hearings in the Education Committee on education, to see what people are coming up. Part of the problem is we have proposed information and bills, and we always have a hearing on everything, but we really need to hear from people. And now we're doing a lot of our hearings virtually, so this is something maybe we can start making sure people know. So maybe you don't have to spend the whole day at the Capitol waiting to speak, but if you sign up for these things, if you take a look at, say, what the Education Committee is hearing that particular day or during session, you'll be able to put yourself in that queue and be called on and provide that. Or even if you can't provide any kind of information verbally, and of course we always want it in writing, even if you're speaking verbally, but you can always write a letter to the committee, and we take a look at all the letters. We get lots of letters, and when you're on that committee, we take a look at them, and we take a look to see what people are writing to us, so we can know what's coming from the community. So these are things that we need to understand and make sure we get that information out to people. One of the things too I wanted to check in with you on is the Fair Housing Commission, because that is one of the things that Dennis has been really interested in. When he was at Legal Services, he was doing housing litigation. But we because of the segregation in our state, because of the zoning issues in our state, because of all the things that we have a difficulty with, a town like Wyndham, we have more subsidized housing and more affordable housing on a per capita basis than anywhere else in the state, except for Hartford. But when we look at our surrounding towns, we don't have that. We provide all this. We provide 3 homeless shelters too: domestic violence shelter, a free shelter in the Holy Family Shelter. We provide all these things. The surrounding towns don't do that. You want to talk a little bit about what fair housing is and how we're going to be able to try and break through some of these barriers to resources and access? I mean, we only have 4.3 square miles here in Willimantic, where most of the housing is.
Sure. The bottom line is that the Connecticut General Statutes prohibit discrimination in housing. So when an individual attempts to get housing, we have found, and we have complaints of discrimination filed with us, where the potential tenant is saying, I've gone to look at all of these apartments, but I keep being denied the opportunity to rent. Connecticut has a housing stock problem, right? We don't have enough housing that is affordable, that is in decent shape for the number of individuals who need to access that housing. So we have an access issue. And on top of having an access issue and a discrimination issue, you have some of the surrounding towns, the suburban towns, that do not want to have affordable housing because they don't want, quote unquote, those people in their communities or changing the face of their community, which to me is a mask for discrimination. Because when you say the face of the community or the character of the community, you're talking about the race and color and national origin. You don't want it to change. You don't want substantially to have your suburban town be filled with people who look like me.
You're on a real roll. I don't want to interrupt you, but I got to point out that when that case I mentioned that Kenneth Clark was involved in as an expert witness, that was the key words that we focused on. That certain people in Manchester, not everybody, it was a minority, but it was a very vocal minority, did not want those people living in their town. And Kenneth Clark, clued us in. He didn't need to clue us in on that one. We knew who he was talking about when he was talking about those people. He was talking about people from Hartford. Kenneth Clark said, no matter what they do, Manchester will become integrated. It's only 8 miles down the road. He was right. Manchester is very integrated now, which is wonderful. Because it's a very good town. And anyway, you're making some excellent points. I wish we could have you on for like 3 hours because there's so many things. I would like to talk to you about some of the cases you've handled in court.
Yes.
But we don't have time for that because that would. I think.
Oh, because I have stories for you.
I bet you do. I have some stories.
Yeah.
I have some stories too. But we could swap stories. But we want to hear the essence of this. We'll have to have you come back and do this again because this is so important.
Yes.
And we're just doing a sort of a survey here, a survey course in CCHRO, led by Cheryl and.
This is a
Anna
primer.
Marie.
This is a primer on your rights to fair housing.
Right.
So any individual has a right to fair housing. When you go to try to get an apartment or you go to try to purchase a home, when you're steered away from certain communities because of your protected class basis, which is your immutable trait, who you are as a person, that you can't help being, right? I could run around this studio for hours and hours and hours. I'm not going to run the color off of my skin. I'm not going to. I'm not going to run around and suddenly I'm going to run the curl pattern out of my hair because I am a woman of color, right? And that these are immutable traits. These are the things that make me who I am. So I should not be treated differently, poorly because I belong to these protected classes. So if you're someone with children and you're looking for an apartment, or you have a Section 8 voucher. In the state of Connecticut, some landlords think, I don't have to take Section 8. I don't want to deal with the government. You're wrong. I tried a case, and it went to the Connecticut Supreme Court, and the Connecticut Supreme Court says that in the state of Connecticut, if you are a landlord, you cannot refuse to rent because of someone's lawful source of income. Now, is Section 8 a lawful source of income?
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. So landlords need to be aware of that, but you, the people, need to be aware of that as well, because we get complaints where you have people who are brazen, and they'll be like, "We don't want children. It's a second floor apartment. We'll hear your kids running around. We don't want children in the apartments because it'll mess up, the apartment for the people living against the law." We look at 4 kinds of evidence, and I'm just going to say this really quick in my
Good.
primer
Well, please
version.
do. Yes.
No,
I want you to say it.
Yes, we have direct evidence, we have comparative evidence, we have pattern evidence, and we have statistical evidence. So when you file your complaint with us, we're looking at all these types of evidence. You're not alone. You're not on your own. We have intake people who will assist you in filing your complaint. And it's important. You have to stand up and you have to show out in order to fight discrimination. And it can be difficult. You can call us at 1-800-477-5737.
That's 1-800-477-5737.
Excellent.
Nicely done.
Excellent. Beautiful.
Muchas gracias.
Excellent. That's perfect.
Anyway,
That is great. That is what we need to hear about housing and discrimination. And we also need to take a look at whether or not we can finally change the attitudes of many of the communities that resist the affordable housing, that resist subsidized housing. Because one of the things that I think they see is when we don't have good enforcement in Hartford or Waterbury or Willimantic, they see that we're not able to keep up with everything because the tax benefits to the local community aren't there, that we need to make sure that the state subsidizes the towns that have the housing. They need to look good, and they need to have the chance to make sure we look good, and then they can say, boy, we can do that, and we'll look good too. And so some of it has to do with the fact the state hasn't provided the good funding for all the places that do the good work. I mean, here we are, a serving community. We serve the region. We serve the state. Hartford serves the state. Hartford serves their region. They have the shelters. They have the housing. They have the capital in Hartford. And the capital doesn't pay any tax, just saying. And so when...
like a lot of other entities.
And
there's no pilot.
Exactly, and there are a lot of legislators that mean very well, but they keep saying, well, let's just take this group and not, we're just going to take them off the property tax roll. And this one too. And then, you want to take care of the people, but you also want to make sure that that particular town isn't the only town that's taking care of the people. They have to get that subsidy from the state in order to make sure, if you want to have property-free tax rather, go ahead, but make sure the state subsidizes it, or make sure the feds subsidize it in those circumstances.
That's a real heavy lift, let me tell you. There's a lot of, everyone in this room knows, there's enormous resistance to building any housing in most suburban towns for families with children. And they don't want to, because they figure it's going to cost money in school and whatnot. And that's one reason. It could be discrimination as well. But as you know, there's multiple reasons as to why people do things, and that's one of the difficulties you have in proving discrimination. There's discriminatory effect, there's discriminatory intent, all that kind of stuff. I dealt with that in the Manchester case, but it was a long time ago, and I've forgotten more than I've learned since then. But
you got it right. Discriminatory effect.
Yeah, but I certainly do know. I see in all these towns that are not urban center towns, as I call them. Every time a developer comes in with a proposal for housing, there's resistance. I know there's 8-30G, which is helpful, but it's not a panacea. And the communities do resist, and a lot of it has to do with they don't want children because they don't want to pay for their educations, and that is a tough lift. I mean, I believe that the main goal of all agencies like yours, and this is my own personal view, is children. It's got to be children. Children. We must support our children. We must make them educated and give them the full opportunity to become educated, because that is the answer to most of the problems we have in this country is education.
Right.
Education is the key.
They're going to inherit our society.
That's right.
And I don't want to have all of these deficits when they are going to inherit our society.
Yeah,
so
I don't want to have the kind of situation that we're having right now with this guy who's running for president who's been indicted in 4 different cases, and that's my opinion, my personal opinion.
Right.
But
which we get to express, right? That's why we're here.
It's very sad that we have that situation. And
Freedom
what
of
is the
speech.
basis of that situation? It's people out there in the community at large who just don't get it. And that's because they weren't educated properly. And so education is key.
Yes, it is.
And one of the things that the CCHRO does in large part is educate the community. Educate the community by bringing these cases. You're educating the community. You win a case at the Supreme Court, it's a big deal, because if that case is the law of the state, when the holding of the case is,
yes,
and it's almost like a class action, and that is so important. And what you're doing, Anna Marie, going out there and spreading the good word, is teaching people is what it's all about. And it's not easy. It's painstaking, but we cannot give up that fight. We must continue to fight so that people are not ignorant. It's a lot easier to be ignorant today than it was when I was growing up as a kid. Life was a lot simpler, or at least it seemed a lot simpler.
Right.
It's a lot more complicated now, because if I need to use my computer or my phone for something special, I can't do it. I need to ask a kid. Anyway.
We are winding down to our last 2 minutes.
Oh, I'm taking up too much time
and
here
I
with
want
my.
to make sure that our guests have a chance to summarize what they're doing. We'll start with Anna Marie Mitchell, and just a quick summary and then we'll go over to Attorney Cheryl Sharp.
Okay, there's a lot of things happening, and we're actually, getting out more in the community to actually educate, not only in English and Spanish, and along with other languages. It's not only Spanish that we've translated into, there's other languages as the community needs them. We have some exciting things coming up. We actually just did a equity study, and he actually presented it at the state legislator. You want to go into that, Cheryl, a little bit?
Sure. We have this equity study and we have a disparity study. Again, thank you to the legislature for funding these studies. The equity study has been released. The disparity study will be released, I believe, in March. And we're going to have a wonderful community access program coming up on May 1st at the legislature or the state armory. And it's going to be wonderful because we're going to have buses coming in from Hartford, from New Haven, from Bridgeport, from Willimantic. And we want the community to come and access all of the material related to the services that we as a state provide. Remember that we want to breathe life into the voiceless so that they will stand up and be heard. That's what the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities is here for. Thank you so much to the two of you. I love the banter back and forth. We need an actual show on network television because it's awesome. It's amazing. It's amazing. Amazing.
We're negotiating a contract with MSNBC. But, it's still not. I can't reveal the details.
Don't forget to have us on.
You're the first guest.
You'll be on first.
I cannot thank my co-host Dennis O'Brien and our very special guest this evening, Attorney Cheryl A. Sharp from the Connecticut Human Rights and Opportunities, and Anna Mitchell, who is the outreach coordinator for bilingual education. Thank you both so much for being here, and we have to have you back because we just touched the surface. We want to get into the details. So thank you so much, and tune in next week for another great show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.